Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow IITians. I would like to welcome you to our next panel. It's the sharing economy. We have got a great lineup of panelists for you today. We have Ursheet Parikh from Mayfield. We have Rakesh Mathur from Flywheel. We have Daniel Ramot from Via. We have Ankit Bhati from Ola Cabs. And we have Trichur from Whisk.me. I'm told by the panelists that this is going to be a sensational, a controversial, yet a very inspiring discussion. So everyone, hold tight. I think they want to make it very interactive, so feel free to ask your questions. And there's also some of the questions posted on the app. If you would like to ask those, please feel free.
Hello, the panels are starting, so please make your way to the session rooms now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrikant. Ursheet, all yours.
Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's always fun to be out at an IIT event, and we have a great panel. What we're going to do is have everyone quickly introduce themselves. We'll poll the audience for some interest items. We'll talk about why the sharing economy is so transformational, why customers love these services, why people are sharing these things, and what are the best practices to build businesses here. How do you kind of go and do startups around this? What are the considerations here, and then sort of the broader big picture. For myself, I'm a partner at Mayfield. Mayfield is one of the oldest venture capital firms in the Valley. It's been around since the 60s. We are a fourth-generation partnership here now. The fund manages over $2 billion. Has been a very active investor in the sharing economy, but invests in a lot of the other deep technology areas as well. And so with that, let me ask Ram to introduce himself.
My name is Ram. Is this on? So what we do is the likes of Uber and Lyft have really put a big dent in the businesses that exist today that were already providing the services for the last many decades. So what we do is we actually provide a platform for those guys to provide better service to their customers and actually survive. And we do that in two ways. They basically operate on our platform. We provide the technology that runs their business. So that does two things. One, it gives them better customer experience through technology. And we also put them all part of the same platform. So because the big thing in this industry is actually providing good service levels. And so by being part of the same platform, even a small company behaves like a large company because they're all aggregated under one roof. That's what we do.
I think Rakesh is starting a new teleportation sharing economy service. No, I'm kidding. He's going to be back. Just hadn't gotten a mic. So Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Ursheet, I didn't want you to say that, man. Sure.
All right.
Hi, my name is Rakesh Mathur. I'm like many of you, I'm also from, this is the IIT Bombay event, right? Woo! No, kidding. I've been an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley now for about 20 years. I'm super excited about being part of this economy. I took over running Flywheel about a year ago, and I'm seeing some, we've thought through stuff. I think we've got a great team, and the ride volumes are scaling incredibly right now. So with that, let me turn it over.
Hi, so I'm Daniel Ramot, co-founder CEO of Via. I think I'm from IIT Jerusalem. So it's a pleasure to be here. We provide shared rides. The platform that we've built is really attempts to be. It's a little bit different from Uber, Lyft, and so forth, in that we're trying to provide a public transit service of sorts. So a little bit like some of the van-based transport, private transport that you might have in India, where they're very low tech. We're trying to provide a tech layer for that, where you can book a ride on your phone, and a van shows up and picks you up and takes you where you need to go, and you share it with 3, 5, 7 other people, and it's completely dynamically rerouted. We operate in Manhattan and been doing it for almost 2 years.
Hi guys, myself Ankit Bhati, IIT Bombay alumni. So IIT Bombay represents, I guess. I am co-founder of Ola Cabs. We are the largest transportation network in India. We started around 4.5 years ago. We started with cabs, but now we have expanded into auto rickshaws, black and yellows, and we are also trying to become the more common public transportation network in India. We are doing about 1 million rides a day. We have almost 500,000 drivers and operators on our platform, and that's the journey that we've been through in the last 4.5 years.
That's great. Well, I think the first question that I wanted, and Ankit, you could start with this, right? For one, right, I think a lot of the companies that change the world are started by people in their 20s. And Ankit here is a great example on that. So a lot of the people in this conference have been asking, okay, what do I want to, when should I start? I was like, whenever you want to. But with that, Ankit, why do you think this is so transformational, the whole sharing economy thing? And what was your vision as you kind of started down this path?
I think the biggest part of the transformation is that it's for the masses. It's for everyone. When you talk about cab rides, especially in India, earlier when I was just out of IIT, that time cab rides were only used for airport transfers or some certain niche use cases. And generally with not the cost of ownership or maintenance as a burden, each and every individual can now afford to be a part of the economy and be a part of that consumer group. And I think that's where it sort of democratizes the services that people are looking for, and it gives a broader platform, and it gives a more accessible means through which to utilize those services without the cost of ownership and maintenance. So I think that's where the biggest transformation lies. It is non-exclusive. It is not for elite or anything or any closed group of individuals. It's for the whole economy, the whole population. And more importantly, sharing economy has started with the basic necessity use cases, transportation, housing. And I think this is where the most important power of sharing economy lies, that it's for the masses, and it makes the use cases more vast and diverse, and it reduces the cost of ownership. It reduces the friction to avail those services.
So why did I not start this when I was in my 20s?
No. Well, I guess we didn't have the smartphones back then.
Okay, yeah, that's.
But we can always make an excuse for not starting one. But no, I'd love your thoughts. We were talking earlier today, right? And I thought you had some great thoughts on why you think this is so transformational.
So I think clearly, Steve Jobs, amongst all his many brilliances, the fact that you can do so much with the supercomputer in your pocket, right?
Yeah.
There was no way for this sort of sharing economy to take place if you were standing on a street corner with your laptop, right? Now, and essentially, it leads to wonderful two-sided networks of service providers and service users, because like in all our cases, right, there's a device inside the car. There's a device that you have, and the whole cloud architecture stuff that you've done, Ursheet, makes it possible for sort of real-time connections to happen, which couldn't take place. I think also the other thing that I'd like to say is, so if technologies that are successful are actually manifestations of human behavior, right? So along with everything that's happened here, we've all sort of, I don't know if evolution is the right word, but human beings ourselves have sort of evolved in the way we want to behave and we want to interact, right? So some of the conversations we were having, right? Many people would say, am I going to rent my home out or put my home on Airbnb, right? Well, as much as all of us who are not 20 might want to not do it, I think there's a huge amount of supply of stuff like that out there, right? Yeah. So I think at its root, it's sort of technology and the technology connection between technology and human beings and how that's evolving, right? And I think the sharing economy is sort of smack in the middle of the crosshairs of that evolution.
Yeah. Daniel, you want to add something?
I think along the same lines, this is one of the first examples of connecting mobile technology to what is kind of the Internet of Things or the offline world, in my view. There's one of these first areas, and it's about sharing and using the excess capacity and so forth, and that's all true, and it's democratic. But I also think it's one of these first examples where the internet is getting into, and mobile technology is getting into real things in our homes, in our cars, and so forth, and changing the way we use them, and it's transformational in that way as well.
So like, see, fundamentally, before the internet and mobile and all that, what used to happen is there was already supply that was being shared. There's taxis were being shared. Hotels are truly shared economy in some sense, right? But what was happening was there was clearly some friction in there that, that caused a lot of supply-demand imbalance. There was not enough supply, and there were some artificial constraints that created that supply. It was the government, the regulations, things of that nature. So I think like what companies like Airbnb and Uber and Lyft have done is they've removed those constraints, right? They've removed that friction, and that brings a lot more supply. If you have a car, you can drive, you can pick up people. That's like the ultimate definition of no friction, right? However, right, I think what's also helped quite a bit is the media, right? Because what was happening many years ago was, there were a lot of these restrictions, but people didn't know about the restrictions. A few super rich people knew about the restrictions, and they would capitalize on it and buy $1 million medallions and hold it to themselves, right? Now, because the media is out there, right, if someone does something, like Uber threw $5 million into the New York market last week, $5 million campaigning using like Obama's campaign manager from 2008 against de Blasio's policies, right? And the media made it possible, right? So I think it's a combination of all those things, but fundamentally it's a lot more supply in the market because there's no friction, and the friction has been removed.
And I'd add a couple of sort of key points here. One is actually not an original point. One is something that the founders of Lyft told us when they'd come to Mayfield for the Series A. They said, if you look at your transportation system, on average in the US is 1 or 1.5 people per car. And you have all this traffic, and it's really operating at like a 10-20% utilization, and now you want to add more roads and all of that stuff like that, and somehow there's got to be a better way of utilizing this infrastructure. This is before the whole sharing model had sort of emerged, right? Because some of these companies end up having to kind of go through a pivot of sorts. So that there's got to be fundamentally a better way of going ahead and actually improving the utilization, and sort of reducing this friction. And so you're right, a lot of these things kind of come along with that. I think the other point here is that the first set of networks, when the first generation of internet happened, and you had a few 100 million people come online, they could connect with each other, interact with each other, do things, right? If you try to buy stuff off eBay, I was telling someone I bought a used car off eBay 10 years ago, and the reason I would buy it off eBay is because I knew that the seller had sold 800 cars and had a 5-star rating versus going into a dealership. Even though I could see the guy, I didn't know how truthful he was going to be. And now you take that and you take the sharing economy, and you now have billions of people with these devices. You have the trust chains, which make up local networks coming online, where riders are rating their customers, customers are rating their riders, and you can pretty much start getting a greater degree of confidence, tie that with location services and things like that. So a lot, clearly very exciting times. I think, now before we move forward, I wanted to ask how many people in the audience have used a sharing economy service, Lyft, Uber, Airbnb, DoorDash, any of those things? Great, majority. How many of you have used the non-transportation sharing economy service? So one of the interesting sort of topics I think we can take up, we'll change the order in terms of what you had planned, but what do you guys think about what kind of companies or what kind of startups or what industries are well set up for this sharing economy transformation?
Yeah, so, okay, since I opened my mouth, right? So, let's try what are not set up.
Okay.
Okay. So I think when America got its independence from Britain, the part of the sharing economy was let's share an army, right? So everybody armed themselves and kicked England out, right? Which, if India had done it the same way, might have been different, right? So I think that's probably a good example of something that shouldn't be in the sharing economy, right?
Fair.
Okay. So short of that, I think short of something like national security or whatever, right? Which did have its use case in a very powerful way. I think it comes down to, if you take the house example, right? You have, clearly people sell their houses. So as much as people have an attachment for their homes, there's a cost at which the attachment can be broken away, right? Yeah. So so homes are certainly something that lead into the sharing economy, right? Clearly, there's some of the examples that we were talking about earlier, Ursheet, the home care stuff, the elder care. There's a lot of that that that's also sort of ripe for the sharing economy. I think it's as long as and I think in some sense the whole way the earlier era of sort of full employment where everybody had full-time jobs, that itself is being threatened, right?
Yep.
So when you can manufacture so efficiently and scale, goods become potentially a less part of what people end up doing, right? So I think almost every service has a role.
Anybody disagree?
No, just to address the question that what are the new ideas where sharing economy could come. The one place I'm really excited about seeing a sharing economy is, truth be told, energy. With the more renewable sources coming up and the new announcement of Tesla, everyone has known about it, right? It would be a great way if consumption and production both happened in lockstep. And that is one of the cases. It's not exactly the sharing economy that we are towards, but it is essentially the same. The way in carpooling, a car owner becomes also a service provider. Similarly, if, for example, you had spare energy because of your solar panels and you could feed back that into the main grid and then consume it back. These are some of the ideas that are transformational, and obviously there'll be a lot of more necessity kind of things that might become sharing economy. We've seen housing, we've seen transportation, obviously, but energy is one of the biggest things that, to be told, is my wish list kind of a economy to see, and it will be an amazing place when we get there.
So, I'm actually not a big believer that every industry is a sharing economy. In fact, I would contend that even people talk about the taxis and ground transportation as sharing economy. In many ways, the definition is very broad now. But if you truly make the definition of sharing economy, I have a personal property that I want to use, and sometimes I don't use it, and therefore I'm willing to share it with others. If that is the definition of sharing economy, actually ground transportation is not such a great sharing economy, right? Like if I want to be a full-time driver, of course, but that's taxis and such like that, right? If you think of Airbnb, it's a great place for a sharing economy, right? Because just the mathematics of it, right? I have a home, right? I'm not in this home for 2 weeks at a time sometimes. So I have a 2-week window of opportunity to make this home productive. Someone is visiting the city for maybe 2 days, 1 week, whatever it is. Chances of me finding a match between supply and demand is quite high for a personal property. Yeah. Now you think about cars. I own a car. I'm leaving now between 9 and 9:15 to go to work, right? What are the chances that between 9 and 9:15, someone within few blocks of me, I'm not saying the chances are zero, but it's a lot less than the Airbnb type thing. So I think there is degrees of which is more conducive to sharing economy. I actually think ground transportation from a pure sharing standpoint is actually not that conducive, and which is the reason you actually see a lot of the companies like Uber and others. I'm mentioning people not in this panel for a reason. But if it was truly that transformational, why would you spend $250 to acquire a customer? Why would you spend $1,500 to acquire a driver? That's what's happening in New York City, right? So that is in some ways destroying value, because basically you're telling someone, go buy a new car, don't use a personal car. That's not happening in New York City. I don't know about San Francisco, right? Go buy a new car, get insurance on this new car, get registration, now drive, and so I just don't, so I think there is a spectrum, and some industries are a lot more suitable. Ground transportation, I don't think is that suitable for a true sort of sharing personal property economy.
So can I talk a little bit about New York?
Yeah, go for it.
So, this thing that happened last week, of which Ram was just talking about, right? So Uber did a brilliant PR campaign, man. There's nothing it's brilliant. That's one of the things.
Can you summarize for the audience exactly what happened?
Okay, so what happened was that there was this report that came out which said that traffic speeds in Manhattan have dropped from, let's say, 12 miles an hour to 9 miles an hour, so some delta of that type, right? And the contention of the administration was that that's as a result of the extra amount of cars that have come on the road because of the sharing economy. Now, and as a result of that, the Mayor de Blasio wanted to put a cap on the number of new cars that can come on the road that Uber and Lyft, et cetera, can put on the road. So, of course, Uber fought that tooth and nail, to the extent that the governor contradicted the mayor. If you were in New York during the time, as I think some of us here were, on the app, there was a de Blasio button that showed up. So it said if you want Uber X, it's going to take you, whatever, 2 minutes. If you press the de Blasio button, it would say it'll take you 25 minutes to get a ride, right? So whether that was true or not isn't the point, right? The next step on that button was kicking off an email campaign, right? So clearly, there's enough people that did that, right? But I think despite the success of Uber that they had through their brilliance in being a PR and a machine of that type, government management machine, the other part is that it's actually true. I mean, if you took Manhattan and put 1 trillion cars in there, the game that, I'm sorry, just stepping back a second, the game that all of this in the transportation industry, what you're playing is the ETA game, right? The estimated time of arrival, how much time it takes the car to get to you, and then how much time it takes for you to get to your destination, right? Now, clearly, if you put 1 billion cars into Manhattan, well, the ETA will be infinite, right? Nobody will ever get there, right? And many of these things are sort of tipping point phenomena, right? So the next incremental car that you put in Manhattan is not going to have a linear effect. It's going to have a non-linear effect. So it actually has taken place. There are way more cars, including rideshares in New York, in Manhattan, that have clogged up the streets. Now, I would say that a large part of the existence of New York itself was what Ram was alluding to earlier as well, right? The medallions. They were priced so high, and they were priced so high because the administration sort of restricted the amount of supply of medallions, right? And that's sort of led to the phenomenon. But that said, taxis do 4 or 5x the amount of rides than Uber does in cities like New York.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I found about the sharing economy is I frankly have been humbled to kind of see things that I think would be great to share, not necessarily take off, and then things that I wouldn't think would be great for sharing have taken off. And so a lot of what this turns out to be is really the fundamentals and the economics. So what, from an investor perspective, we're beginning to look at is, do you have good organic growth? And is your per unit economics for what it takes for you to acquire a customer, to the frequency a customer uses your service, how frequently they churn, and how much money you make off that? And with that in mind, right, we've seen some of so Lyft, I referred to earlier, but even, and Ram, I disagree that even the fashion stuff. So there is companies like Rocksbox where people are just sort of sharing jewelry, to Poshmark where women are trading their fashion closets, where the company now is at more than 100 million in revenues, right? Again, but we are also seeing doctors taking their spare time and sharing it for on-demand sort of health on things like Health Tab. Psychologists doing that for mental health stuff like on Lantern. Gyms doing it with ClassPass. So there is pretty much. I'm almost getting to this point to say that in a lot of these services, the problem is not really demand, because if you are giving good price convenience, and convenience is a big factor around the sharing economy services, the bigger bottleneck around this class of companies is really how do you scale with quality? How do you bring more service providers online? And to that effect, given that we have so many other panelists who are actually creating successful businesses out on that, I'd love for them to kind of share the team on what has been their view on their best practices that they would like to share with everyone on how should people think about really building great supply networks on these on-demand economies. Ankit?
Yep. So it's a tricky problem. The reason sharing economy is taking off, one of the other things is it through this we are able to measure the demand, and the demand has, for all intents and purposes, been infinite. It's about the supply, but supply will only make sense if it's a quality supply, and that's why maintaining the quality of the supply is one of the biggest things we are struggling with, and to be told everyone in sharing economy will struggle with. There are a lot of things a lot of people are trying. Obviously, just to talk about the specifics of what we are trying, a good feedback system, right? How do you weed out the good players versus the bad players in the supply? That has been one of the hallmarks of how you can identify the problem. Then the other part is to treat the suppliers as a part of your ecosystem, as not an employee, but as an at-will contractor. And that means that it's all about enabling them to provide a better service. Cab industry, for example, especially in India, the drivers have always been with the mentality of an employee instead of an owner, right? So what that means is they did not have an ownership of what is the quality of service they are providing. It was more of a 9-to-5 job. And the way we are tackling this problem is by creating the sense of ownership. It's all about training them. It's all about making them realize that they are part of the service industry. For example, the way you are greeted in a hotel or a restaurant or an airlines is how you are expected to have the experience of a car travel as well. And how do you internalize that kind of behavior into the drivers? So in specific case of cabs, I think it's more about changing the mindset of the suppliers. I don't doubt the intentions of the drivers. No one wants to fundamentally provide a bad service. But I think they have always been, they didn't have the enablements that could have been there to do a better job of providing the service they are providing. And that's the major part, I think. It's about treating your suppliers with the kind of professionalism that you treat your customers and making sure that you enable them into delivering a better service. If a driver is grumpy, then the driver will tend to take it out on anyone he can. If he is driving rashly but he doesn't even know it, then it will not be easy to get him to change his behavior. So how can you monitor the quality of his behavior, quality of his driving, quality of his car, and then giving them regular feedbacks, giving them a better framework through which they can assess themselves. I think that is the biggest lock that can be opened.
I'm going to take one step back and then tie it back to supply. I'm going to side with Ram on the sharing economy for a second. I'm going to say that at least it is maybe a bit extreme, but at least to me, the sharing economy is somewhat of a misnomer. Most cases, what happens to the sharing economy, especially as these companies scale, and I'm going to argue it's also true for Airbnb. So I haven't been in that many Airbnbs, but every one I've been in, it was a professional owner of an apartment that was renting it out to me. I think and this is why they got in trouble in New York with the Attorney General, the vast majority of rooms they rent out, at least in New York City, the vast majority is people who own apartments to rent them on Airbnb. So it's not truly a sharing economy where I'm gonna rent my house when I'm off on vacation for a couple of weeks, the way you're describing. So even in housing, I think what happens, it's a possibility, but I think well, one could, yeah.
A disproportionate portion of the drivers are part-time people. I mean, literally, moms who are taking this thing, or college kids, things like that.
I've been on rides and, I'm sorry.
Well, I'll just say they're part-time people, but they drive for Lyft as their job, right?
No, not as a primary job. In fact, that's a great question. On each of your platforms, how many people are full-time on the platform working versus doing it part-time?
No, but I'll answer them, but very quickly. There are part-time taxi drivers too.
Right.
There have always been part-time taxi drivers. There have been, like you went to New York 20 years ago, there'll be drivers that drive at night and during the daytime they'll go for college. That is not a new thing.
Yeah, the distinction I'm making is I have a home and I'm going away to Tel Aviv for 2 weeks for vacation. I'm going to rent it out. Renting out that home is not my job. It's a thing that I do, right? If I have a car and I'm on my way, I don't.
Okay.
My wife objects. But I'm on my way to, from Manhattan to the Bronx. If I pick somebody else up on the way, then I'm sharing a resource that I was planning to use anyway. Or if I rent my car on relay rides, right? Maybe that's an example. Though I think even there, they're seeing a lot of people buying cars to rent them on relay rides, right? So that's a distinction that I'm making. And it's the same thing that happened to eBay, right? You started out with eBay. Most of you look like you remember what eBay is. That you would sell things that you owned, and nowadays you go to eBay, it's almost all power sellers. And I think similar phenomenon happens with the sharing economy. So tying that back to supply for a second, I think it's about creating an economic opportunity. If you create a good economic opportunity for your driver, your house renter, whatever it is, then you can scale your platform. And if you can communicate it well to those folks, that there is a good opportunity.
Well, I'm going to take one more question to the panel right now, and then we'll, but on the Q&A side, please start sending questions in. You can stand up and just ask a question or put it out in the app. But now I'm going to take the skeptical view, since we started, saying share economy is so transformational, to like, is this a fad? Is this like Groupon, when the novelty and the price subsidies wear off? Is this thing going to like crater, or 10 years from now, we will look back at this time and say, this is how, just as the internet transformed a lot of the things for us, how we shop, this is going to change.
So I don't think it's a fad. I think there's truly value in that. However, like what I would say though is, with the amount of money that is being pumped into this space, right? I think people are doing simply irrational things, right? So I mean, the fact that you can, like Uber, even today, as to other services, spend $1,500 to acquire each driver, right? The fact that they still spend $200 to $250 to acquire a customer who has a high churn, who will go away when the discounts go away, right? That is just an irrational thing, and so I think a lot of companies over the next 3 to 4 years will piss away a lot of money that transfer wealth from investors to drivers and to customers, right? And then there'll be like, once that exuberance goes away, there'll probably be 2 or 3 companies per market that are actually running a profitable business in this sort of sharing space. That's sort of my view.
So my turn? So I don't think it's a fad, okay? I think clearly the amount of money it's also like, it's sort of investor-led charities, right? That's what these companies are. At some point, and I think what that does is it tends to lead to markets which are not winner-take-all and make them winner-take-all. Because transportation is all about pick me up fast and get me where I want to go fast, right? Whether it's an airplane or whatever else, right? And I think, for a while, while the investor exuberance lasts, we're all in the investor exuberance game, so I hope it keeps lasting, right? So
some more than others.
Some more than others. But I think the ones that will be left standing would be more of the type that you were talking about, which is sort of the people that are the power sellers on eBay or the power drivers, et cetera, right? But despite that, it is transformational because you've shown the way that the Lyft person could take a 2-hour ride. Although I've been at the receiving end of that, right? I've had somebody who flew in from Omaha, Nebraska to take a vacation in San Francisco, who told me that in a Lyft car while she was taking me around San Francisco. I said, okay, I'll pull out Waze and help you out. Yeah.
Well, audience, you guys, go ahead. Yeah, please just state your name, quick 10-second introduction of yourself, and then the question.
So, boy, that's loud. I'm Deepak Srinivasan, IIT Kanpur 85. I'm CEO of my own startup, Zulu Social. So we manage audiences for brands. So I have a question for the panel, which is that, is there any measurable data on how ride and transportation sharing services are impacting first-time car purchase decisions and also multiple car homes and having homes that want to have a second or third car? Is there any credible data, and both for the US and maybe a market like India? So that's my question.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was, is the sharing economy in the case of transportation actually impacting decisions for people to buy cars? And so clearly we all have anecdotes of people who are not buying cars or not buying a second car because of that, but is there any market data around that?
Both US and India.
Go ahead, Ankit. Yeah.
Sorry. Let me address the question because I think it is most pertinent for India. If you talk about the fraction of ownership per capita out of 1,000, almost 700 people in US own a car. But if you talk about India, it is sub-30s, right? And if you look at that, the constraints that India as a country has, small geographical footprint, large population, ownership versus sharing, I think sharing wins. And it is not just, I think, fundamentally a question of whether the model will take off or not. I don't think the fate of car ownership versus sharing the car will depend on the fate of the sharing economy per se. I think it is absolutely a necessity in some of the countries, especially in India. And truth be told, for Ola and for a lot of transportation networks that are coming up, the biggest fight is not with the cab drivers or anyone like that. The biggest challenge is how do you change the mindset of not owning a car and actually using a transportation network as a service. And I think that's one of the, I'll give you one quick small example. This thing happened in case of desktops, right? Before mobile took off, the penetration of desktop was increasing, but it hadn't reached to that extent. I think it was somewhere around 3% households had a desktop in India. And suddenly now almost 30% of the population of tier 2 and tier 3 cities still, they have a mobile phone and they are connected to the internet. So I think with the new wave of technology, the mindset changes and the adoption actually takes up. So with the sharing economy in cabs coming up, I'm sure a lot of people will realize that they don't need a full-time cab, and especially the households that wanted that cab plus one car or plus two cars, they will definitely not go towards that option. And I definitely believe that it is one of the more transformational impacts that this whole economy is creating.
You know, there's a question that's online that 10 people won't ask. And so I think that probably takes priority over one of those here. And it's really, will sharing economy suffer if contract workers are treated as employees? And for some of you in the audience who may not be aware, there's a lot of labor laws that are going through courts in different places where the 1099 contract workers in the sharing economy platforms, whether they are really employees and whether they should get employee benefits and cost reimbursement and things like that is basically a big hot debate topic. So anyone care to take that one?
I think logically what I feel is contract workers, as long as they're paid the right amount so they can buy their own healthcare and they get a fair fees, it should be all right. However, I think it takes, the whole world is moving towards everyone working for themselves, doing part-time work. The whole world is moving towards that sort of thing. So like eventually I think it should be all right. However, I think there's going to be a lot of legal battles because the existing industries are very protectionist, and this is one way for them to sort of slow down the new age companies, and they're going to try. There's going to be a lot of news about it for the next few years, but I'm hoping that in a few years' time they'll sort of go away.
So I think my take is that there's always sort of it's a question of market forces really more than anything else, right? If people are paid less than a living wage, then it's not going to work anyway, because then the supply will, by definition, dry up, right? So I think if you're assuming that people are being paid at what it costs them to, do this versus doing something else and get the delta cost of everything else that a full-time job would give you, if actually that's happening right now, and it's probably happening right now, again, because of the investor exuberance. Correct. So after some of that settles down, if in fact they're not being able to make that amount of money, and I know from the regulated licensed taxis, the taxi drivers actually end up making a decent amount of money, but they actually work 12 hours a day, right? So I think once and if the investor exuberance dies off, and it always does, right? Then I think the reality of whether this is a living wage or not is going to kick in and compress supply.
I mean, my perspective on this particular thing is that there is a real thing about living wages, and that most companies should be paying living wages. But to the best of my knowledge, most of the sharing economy companies are actually paying much more than the living wages, because they really are finding that for the networks to thrive, supply and the quality of supply and the quality of customer experience ends up having to be a lot better. And then I personally do talk to a lot of the people who kind of do these services. I was sharing an example of this one kid who graduated with a lot of student loans and was finding it hard to kind of get a job with a degree around sort of sports medicine, and essentially now makes more than $30 an hour on average between two sharing economy services. One is about, sorry, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
$120 an hour?
No, $30 an hour.
Oh, $30.
But for him, that was transformational, because what it is doing for him is that it's allowing him, so he's doing, elder care, and then he's doing this ride-sharing stuff. He likes the fact that he's his own boss. And, and I think his personal situation was such that he was probably discriminated against when he went for the other job. So he actually likes the empowerment and the independence he gets. So I think it's a real issue. I think it'll get debated and fought very hard on all sides. But then I think we'll see, my bet is that there'll be a recognition of a middle ground where these companies will have to do more. They're not just contractors, they're not full-time employees, but there'll probably be something in between that will emerge on the regulatory law. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kapil, IT Bombay 2004. So my question is more about the competition. So for Ankit, the question to you is, what are the few things that Ola has done really well so that you are able to take the lead over Uber in India? And similarly, the question for Rakesh is that, do you think it's a winner-takes-all market? And what are few things that will differentiate Flywheel from Uber to compete in this market?
Okay, so I'll start with my part of the question. I think Ola started in 2010, and to be told, when we started, it was a very different concept. We started with outstation and a long-term car kind of a solution. After that, getting into the point-to-point travel services, the biggest thing that has been in our mind is just to keep the pace of the company intact. And I think that's one of the most defining things that you will hear about Ola from all the team members that I have and all the people who know what Ola has been doing is the aggression. I think we have been faster in almost every aspect of it. We have disrupted our own models 2 to 3 times in the past 2-3 years. We started with the outstation, as I mentioned, then we launched point-to-point service, and then we completely stopped the earlier model. And then after doing that, we actually got on board auto rickshaws, black and yellows, even those kind of transportation options onto our platform. There is a news that has come out recently that Ola is trying to get into buses as well as a part of transportation offering for the public. And I think that's more about it. We are more local, we are more aggressive, and our vision is to be the transportation platform end to end. So the way I look at it, it's India as the market, technology as the solution, and transportation as the problem. These are the 3 major governing factors through which what we are doing, and it's more about not worrying about the competition and just keeping that pace and making sure that you always innovate yourself, you always disrupt yourself before anyone else gets the chance to do it to you. And that's about it, I think.
So I don't see transportation as a winner-take-all market. There's when you're out in the rain, you're going to raise your hand and get a taxi if that comes to you faster, right? Or if Uber is surging, and you can get you can give a flywheel driver a 30% tip. We've locked in this guaranteed tip notion, right? So you can actually show the tip to the driver in advance. People are going to make sort of the cost decision, right? If it's 10 o'clock at night and Lyft pool is taking you from one end of the city to the other, or Via is for $5, you're going to do that, right? So it's peculiar in that when everything is busy and when you really want it, you're probably willing to pay 10x what you'd pay normally, which is how Surge works, right? On the other hand, when when you can wait, then it all becomes about price, right? So all of these characteristics are sort of very different than what it takes to get really attached to a Rolex watch or something like that, right? So I don't believe it's a winner-take-all market. Now, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No?
I thought you were done.
No, okay, I'm done.
So we have time for one last question, and I guess Rena is the one who's going to pick.
Hi everyone, my name is Priya. We all talked about transportation and housing for shared economy, but there's one industry that we never talk about, it never comes up in the newspaper, and that's beauty. We've had a lot of startups, Vanity, Glam Squad, there's a startup in India called Bulbul. These are all beauty-related shared economy startups. Where do you guys see that industry going in shared economy? What's your vision? And I don't know the exact stats, but a lot of them were like startup failures because they couldn't expand, scalability issues. So what would you blame the failure for? Thanks.
So the question is, how do we see the applicability of the sharing economy around just beauty and fashion? And I think we believe that there is a big opportunity there. I think it comes down to the fundamentals of that. This is where one of the companies I referred to early on, right, Poshmark, is essentially high-end fashion dresses, women essentially making sort of using their mobile phones to share their clothes and with others. But I was giving an example of Rocksbox, and in the US we have quite a few companies that have scaled to a certain level. I think one of the real challenges about it tends to be that a lot of the partnerships in venture that actually evaluate these companies often tend to be male-dominated, and they can kind of go for a complete tailspin trying to evaluate the fundamentals around these businesses, and sometimes they may go talk to their wives about it, who may be very much on the high-end sort of fashion side of the house. So there is, in my opinion, quite a real challenge that is there, where these class of companies do end up having to kind of go through a certain hurdle. But I think the more recent conversations in the Valley and in the US and in tech in general has raised the awareness on this. And so I think most partnerships actually are much more aware and open to kind of understanding these businesses and making things happen. Not to mention, you have venture firms with all women partners that are coming to the fore as well. So this goes back down to, as you build the business, how is it going to be a fundamentally good business? Supply, demand, customer success, quality, all of those things is where this thing comes to. We are out of time. I know there were a lot more questions online and here. We'll be around for a few minutes. After this, you can ask us questions there. Thanks for staying through this, and thanks for the panelists.
Thanks, Ursheet.
Thank you, Ursheet. I just want to thank all the panelists, and we have a memento for them, so I'll just hand them out.